Merrily was, I've talked about things happening at Hamilton Air Force Base in 1952 when my father-in-law first met Prince Naga of the Raptor Empire. And Merrily was doing some research and she found a quote. What did you say you were looking up? Just UFO activity or something?
UFO activity in August 1952 at Hamilton Air Force Base.
Okay, so she came across this quote that I've never seen before, and this just validates again, in addition to what Richard Dolan had in his book about the sighting when UFOs came into Hamilton Air Force Base. And Mark's dad was part of all that, and it just really quickly says August 3rd, 1952, 4:15 to 5:30 p.m. Two Air Force pilots, Captain L.R. Hadley and Lieutenant D.A. Swimley and Air Force Captain W.T. Persk, saw visually and with binoculars two circular or spherical silvery objects 60 to 100 feet diameter at 12,000 and 18,000 feet, drifting east to west on a 15-mile track passing overhead, darting and dogfighting at estimated 400 to 450 miles per hour. The upper object dropping from 18,000 to 12,000 feet at the end, joined by 8 more similar objects appearing in pairs in the west, about 15 to 20 miles distant. No sound, an hour and 15 minutes, 3 witnesses. So thank you, Merrily. That's one more validation of everything I've been talking about. So tonight, Merrily is going to do part 3 of her Earth Game Mastery. And I'm just going to let her start and kind of go over what she's going to be talking about. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, so I think this is the most exciting. Hopefully you'll find it exciting and useful. What we're going to do, I wanted to remind you that I am synthesizing and compiling Lisa Royale's research. So she gets full credit for the exploration of this material, lisaroyale.net. I wanted to say that first. And thanks again for joining us. So let's see, in part 2 or 3, we briefly explored the influence of 6 forefather and 4 mother species on us, the human race. Why? Because history and repetitive patterns, unrecognized or denied, often repeat themselves. Tonight, by bringing to our consciousness these galactic family wounds and archetypal patterns, we can then compassionately understand the ancestral foundation from which these arose. So now that means we all have a conscious choice. We always have, but we can choose to support each other and take responsibility without blame, which is often a challenge without blame for our healing and the integration of our emotional and mental triggers. And we do this not for us alone, but for all and the galactic family at large. And why is this important? Because ultimately, there is no other. We are they, and they are us, playing in the illusion of time. And I am a mirror of you, and you are a reflection of me. So what we do for ourselves, we do for all others. By considering that each of us volunteered for this Earth Grand Experiment game, we can then empower ourselves to actualize as the creator beings that we truly are by choosing no more victim dynamics. This can be done by opening and allowing the compassionate and non-judgmental integration of our emotions and our thoughts. And so to assist with that, I will direct you to 7 of my favorite simple yet profound tools that I have discovered. I am not interested in inventing a new book. I think there is profound information and tools that have been used for a long time. I do not recommend anything that I have generally not met the person myself or have used the tools successfully. So many of you may have heard from them. We will discuss that toward the end of this session. And they will be posted this week for those that want more detail on it, I will post the websites and the technique on my website at supersoulsolutions.com. And feel free also to contact me at Merrily at Super Soul Solutions if you need more clarity, or if you're working with one of the tools for integrating these emotions. If you're working on one of the tools and you find it difficult or you want some support, please feel free to contact me. The great news is that we are on a positive timeline now, and we will succeed. I know that sounds a lot, but I am positive. So please enter the future with confidence, and let's not allow ourselves to be deterred from this long-awaited galactic graduation. This is the 7th attempt of the human race to graduate from the 3rd through the 4th to the 5th. And we will do this, both for the sake of Mother Earth and for the human species. So I would like to start by a quote from Lisa Royal about the importance of why we are interested in clearing out these emotional patterns for integration. Quote, "As the species awakens, one of its first steps is to clear out the old, stuck energy that no longer serves it. And this is the time for awakening. As of 2012, we entered the last of a 75,000-year grand cycle. So this is the time that we jump into greater consciousness and frequency that is allowed for us, as previously discussed, by entering the photon belt, and that our DNA will be downloaded and come more online with greater abilities. And we all at our own pace, you don't have to worry about this, will have that activated with your intention being that you would like that. So initially, I'm continuing with her quote, initially this old stuck energy usually takes the form of emotion, because emotion is simply energy expressed through human form and shaped by belief patterns, past pain, and deep fear. When emotion is denied, that energy buries deeper and then later erupts on the densest level, the physical one. On a human level, that means disease, imbalance, and physical discomfort. On the planetary level, that can mean earth changes, such as earthquakes, storms, strange weather patterns, confusing migration patterns of animals, and much more. You are seeing all of this happen on Earth now. It is a sign of deeper process that has been initiated. On one hand, it can be a cleansing that makes way for positive growth if the deeper lessons are learned and behavior changes. On the other hand, if seen negatively, it can be a way to temporarily release pressure and then return to the old way of being, as if there were no connection, thus creating more internal pressure and disease, end quote. That is why we will be covering the 3 major wounds of each of the 6 species. And as I quickly cover those, and discuss them very briefly, because we have a lot of material to cover today, please ask yourself, do I do that? Do I relate to that? Lisa Roya has something like close to 100 wounds she's charted, and has just in the Pleiadian lessons alone that the Pleiadians learned as a young species to mature species, she has 15 wounds. And so her website's excellent for more in-depth work if you are interested. I only have time to cover 3 of what I thought were really interesting ones for each species. So this is just done as a review because for me, it was like I was checking it off, like, oh, I do that. Yep, I do that. Yes, I feel that. Yep, I do that. Yes, I do that. And there was another brief quote before I do this, so that you understand the significance of this, by a woman named Taryn Creamy. And on her website, she says it's evidently a channeling from angelics. Some may wonder how the parent's beliefs could be transferred to the child. Quite simply, it is like an automatic encryption that gets downloaded into the very DNA of the child, much like the genetic makeup that a child inherits from their parents. Scientists have yet to discover that the genetic makeup that one inherits from their ancestral lines also includes the collective belief patterns held within that genetic lineage. This is why we have said many times that many of you are not only clearing limiting beliefs that are being held within your being, but you are also serving to assist your genetic line with the encoded information on how to release that limiting belief. So,
Wow.
and it goes on. She has more detail on that. As each subconscious belief is brought to your conscious attention, which is the purpose for this series, to bring it to your conscious attention if it hasn't been already. For further assessment, you can then decide if it is, in fact, a belief that you still wish to keep, or if you are willing to release it and replace the belief with a new one. And to not worry about this, there's a divine flow that happens with all of this. But as I said, at the end of this last part 3, I will be providing some of the most interesting, useful tools that I have discovered and used successfully.
Great.
Okay. Now, also, this is a brief overview before I get into it. There are 7 general genetic traits and tendencies from galactic forefathers, and this is really broadly generalized. And the polarization game involves 2 sexes, humanoid sexes, male and female. And these references are stereotypes, so please forgive the masculine and feminine traits when I explain them. So these are traits that were genetically installed from our forefathers and foremothers in the early days as a primitive species of human. For the male, what was genetically installed was for them not to feel fear, to desensitize from their heart and feelings. Okay, so, and the second was to subordinate to dominant males. The pecking order thing, enslavement, hierarchy, that kind of thing. So that literally is not just behavioral, because we are fashioned after the behavior of our parents. And I just explained how that is passed down, both subconsciously. So genetically installed for females is the monogamy gene, so that we didn't like throw the baby out the window and go look for some fun. Okay. The second, and I've told my clients, some male clients this for years, and they really appreciated it, is the oxytocin hormone. This is called the bonding or cuddling hormone. And what I explain to men, because they'll say, wow, the woman, this gal I'm dating keeps calling and bugging me, and gosh, she's like so obsessive. What's the deal? I said, did you hug her? Did you put your arm around her? Did you kiss? And God forbid you had sex. And they go, yes, no, yes. And I said, well, guess what? The oxytocin hormone, and this is genetically installed in females, lasts for 2 weeks. So basically, after having bonding with a male of any kind, even a lot of, cuddling and stroking, we are stupid for 2 weeks. Okay. For men, it lasts 2 hours. Which explains a lot. And excuse my crassness here, but I guess it's why we have to keep screwing them for them to remember who we are. So
I just get to go and hold my husband's hand every week for 2 hours.
But anyway, it's important for men to know that so that they can be more respectful. And the third genetically installed for females was programming to be weak and subordinate to males. And of course, look beautiful. So the Syrians encoded secretly with Palladians against the Lyrian enslavers our human DNA to awaken at the 75,000-year grand galactic cycle, which is now. Okay, So it is really an exciting time. I just wanted to put that out, that was the Sirians doing along with the Palladians. The Palladians borrowed our DNA to help adapt for themselves to live on Earth. So they're literally our first cousins, and most look very much like us. And they may be the first to come forward in disclosure because they won't freak the locals out. Like the raptors.
Good point.
Okay. The Lyrians.
The raptors will bring chocolate.
Oh, okay. Well, that will work. Which you might want to let people know is one of the top items that is traded galactically.
Yeah, yes, it is.
Chocolate among all species.
They export a lot of chocolate.
Yes. So one last thing that Lisa commented about, and I found this fascinating, was Lyrians. A lot of humanoids have larger eyes. The Lyrians actually genetically programmed our human eyes to be small. Why? Because if you look at the symbol of Egyptian history, you've got the Horus eye, you've got the eye of God. You even have the Egyptian culture duplicating the god by the big kohl, making their eyes look big with lots of dark makeup. Why? Because they were duplicating the gods. Now, her point was that the Lyrians, who will be the first I'll be discussing again and quickly going over their wound, they literally did not want us as their equals. They were interested in enslaving humanity. Sound familiar with some interesting groups on the planet? Okay. So they wanted us every time we looked, well, now in the mirror, I don't think they had mirrors in the interval time, but now, or looked at each other, that we would feel less than, a sense of like a flaw or not good enough. And this level of insecurity is rampant in the human race. And so I'm just wanted to give these as a couple of really what I found interesting examples of genetic agendas, starting off with the Lyrians. Okay, so we're going to go through these 6 races. And I'm going to discuss really briefly the 3 wounds, the 3 major wounds. And remember that they may have 15 wounds, but these are the ones that I believe that we will all relate to the most. So the Lyrians were the first ones. They were cosmic explorers. They were the custodial gods. And these pictures are examples. That's Lyra constellation. And these are skeletons that have been found all over the world. 100 have been found in the United States alone that are legitimate. And the Lyrians had a section of them that were giants. And the height of these skeletons ranges from 10 feet to 70, according to David Wilcock, if you can believe that. So these are some brief slides of that. So anyway, these are other diggings found, and Thor is up there in the middle because the Vikings and certain groups of the elite believe that they ascended from Thor, who was an extraterrestrial overlord at the time. So they're basically explorers and marauders, and they're big on ownership. And I am ashamed to admit that the first word when I was a baby that my mother said was mine, which means that I definitely have some Lyran ancestry. And one of the things, of course, too, you can see how much of our planet, as you know, everything, my house, my this, my car, the moon, all this. Feline being and another giant holding a lion is Lyran ancestry. So the ownership, they were denial of weakness and fear. They were in denial of weakness and fear. These are wounds, because when you're in denial, it ends up being a wound and creates problems. They did not want, as I said, humans to be equal. They actually wanted to utilize us as slaves at the time. So they had a fear of total equality. All right. Now we go to the Palladians, and he'll put up a slide in a minute of the constellation right there. And the Palladians basically are social engineers, and they are the positive polarity. So remember, we have no judgment, no right or wrong, but in a polarity game, we have service to self, service to others, and we're trying to balance in between. So we think of service to others as positive. We think of service to self as negative. It's not in the eyes of the universe, okay, which is inherently neutral and seeks to balance itself out. So the Palladians were extremely positive, to the point where they were in complete denial and intolerant. They were in denial of their own shadow, and they were intolerant of anyone else in the shadow. And I am also, when I say ashamed to admit, I'm not that ashamed, but it took me a long time, and I was so excited to find this information, because I had this weird habit when I was younger, all the way up to 19 years old, where every boyfriend I had looked identical. I would not talk to someone, go figure, I would not talk to someone who swore, who smoked, who drank, who did this. In other words, a perception of like kind of, I wasn't religious or programmed that way, but it was like this inherent thing that anything that I perceived as negative or dark or this or that, I didn't want anything to do with. And when I started finding out what the Palladians look like, the boyfriends all looked like that.
Oh, wow.
And it was only later when I was giving readings, they said, you have a strong Palladian ancestry, among other things. And it just, once I discovered that, then I changed my dynamic. But it just shows you how we can be so programmed. So I'm very sensitive to the Palladians' intolerance of people's free will choices of what they want to explore. So, and they also were in denial of their own grief and guilt. One of their things is, even though their intention was good, they over interfered with the early humans. And this caused Orion retaliation, which caused total destruction of one of their planets.
Wow.
Which just like practically killed them. They just couldn't believe it. And they carried the shame and the guilt. Why? Because the third wound, you don't think of this as a wound, but they're overly enthusiastic. They're so enthusiastic that they'll tend to just go, let's go help, let's go do it, before they think the consequences through. So I'm sure you can feel, I hope, some of these tendencies that we have, or parents have, or children have, and they go way, way back, carried down through that lineage, Palladian lineage. Then we go into the Vegans. Now the Vegans and the Syrians both had that's the stations. Yeah, here are the Vegans. Example of the Vegans. They had very early bases on the moon and Mars, by the way. And the Vegans were the only ones that I knew about, offshoot of the Lyran. They got tired of the Lyran patriarchal, quote, masculine, unquote, outward, forceful, might makes right approach. And they did the opposite. They went inward, somewhat self-reflective, introversion. And as a consequence, one of their wounds was loneliness. And their biggest wound was homesickness.
Wow.
Now, I talk to a lot of people who remember themselves perhaps as a star child. And they just I want to get my job done and leave and go back home. Okay. So the Vegans had extreme homesickness. And that is understandable, but that's not why we're here. Every single one of us volunteered, and we are here to integrate Earth and our bodies, connecting heaven and Earth, because we are actually walking antennas and designed to do that. So now remember, this was in the early stages, the wounds they had, and since then they have worked through a lot, because all time is actually simultaneous, and that's all very complicated subject. So they basically were the ones, as I mentioned before, that started the mystical practices. They were extremely disciplined, yoga. They had mystical priests. They were very internal, and kind of like Spock. They also would tend to, I guess, as some of the ascetic teachings in religion, they would tend to deny themselves and be very intellectual and, not self-nurturing. So that was their tendency, more towards what you call the feminine side, in some ways, a balance. And so it was loneliness and homesickness, and the third one was secrecy. They started the secret societies. They had to keep it away from Lyra. That's what they that's what they thought. However, what happens with secrets? You automatically create polarization, fragmentation, and separation. So that was their wound. Okay. And you can see all these things are going on the planet right now. We've got tons of Orions. Earth was the second place Orions came to. And when we get there, you're going to really understand why we've had the challenges on this planet, because we have all of this here. This is a huge melting pot. All right, so then we go to the Syrians, and the Syrians came from Vega, and they're the genetic engineers. Okay, and this is a picture of Sirius A and B. And remember, the Pleiadians are more the social engineers interested in psychology and people, and the Syrians are very genetic engineers. They tend to take over responsibility for everything. Now, these are wounds, because remember, what we're looking for is balance. So my question for you would be, how many of you can allow the phone to ring without picking it up and thinking the world is going to fall apart? Okay.
Almost.
Yes. So if that's the case, you carry this tendency. This is an example of Syrian beings. Some have blue skin, general representation of that. So that would be one of the wounds of the Syrians, saving humanity. Okay, so I discussed this briefly before. We think saving humanity is a great idea. Saving humanity is a young species approach because it implies that a victim situation. And saving humanity is what they had to learn was the delicate balance between over interfering and assisting, which I'm sure as parents, as friends, we are working with that delicate balance as well. And remember, we are healing all of this for the galaxy in this lifetime, everyone that's here, okay, that chooses to do this. So they also were very crusaders. We're going to go do this. And they needed to be validated. That was another wound. So they tended to volunteer for hero and martyr and self-suffering and for the good of all.
Wow.
Which religion also perpetuates often. So this is a Syrian ideology. Us versus them. In other words, there's an enemy out there. Now, this is a really, 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 really tough one for Earth to get, because we create our reality by our thoughts, and it's too complicated. It's not the purpose of this part 3. So with that thought, when we believe, it's not a question of denying, but when we have an investment in victim perpetrator or in enemy and hero, we perpetuate this. And according to very evolved elders, they said this perpetuation of this dynamic is the thing that has slowed the human evolution the most.
Wow.
Okay. Which is very fascinating to just contemplate on. At first, I was very resistant. And I go, well, we do have enemies. We do it. But I started working with it, and it's a very interesting idea. So the hippie movement, and so the power elite also uses some of this. And the hippie movement was very interesting. My age, hippie movement, flower children, because they almost created the jump we needed. And the power elite do not, power quote elite, many Orions and different lineages, but they don't know what to do. They cannot, their biggest fear is you putting flowers down their gun barrels. Okay. They're like going, we can't deal with that. We don't know what to do. We can't. They're happy about battling you and fighting you. They love that. But so this is what it takes. It will take literally the new consciousness will be something like, oh, they'll create some drama thing of why we have to go to massive war that usually always has 6 different agendas to it. And we go, well, we can see that you think that's a great idea, but we're not convinced of it. So you go ahead and we vote no. And you get millions of people doing that, and the paradigm shifts. That's what they don't want to happen. And that's what happens when the consciousness, because we say, we think there's a better idea. It's as simple and profound as that. But because humanity has been so conditioned, which we'll get into, because the human wound is worshiping and giving your power away to authority figures. Okay. So keep that in mind. So we're doing this again. So now we're into Orion. They, like the Pleiadians, were extreme. Yeah, so this is the Empire. So remember I said, think of Orion like the Empire. You had the Darth Vader, extreme negative polarity, that always loved conflicts, always was addicted. One of their wounds is addicted to conflict and polarization. So how many times have we not had wars on this planet? We've had occasional golden ages, but basically there are groups and lineages so invested in conflicts all the time that it's going to take us to go, no, done. We don't believe it. We're not doing it. End of subject. Okay. And so this is also Vega constellation and a representation from some artists of a Vegan looking person. So
this was Orion.
I mean, Orion, I'm sorry. Thank you, Orion. So negative polarized, they chose the hardest path. The hardest, a lot reincarnated on Earth now. Okay. They reject emotions as unsafe. Okay. So even if we're talking about these extremes, we can look inside ourselves and go, where are we rejecting an emotion? Where are we not expressing honestly? Where are we not doing vulnerability? They also over intellectualized. They had a fear of transition, usually around death, and an extreme fear of spirituality. Okay. So those people that are total skeptics run those lineages. They have a lack of self-nurturing to themselves and others. Like think of the military masculine programming, right? They're very OCD because their fear of being out of control or being controlled. So therefore, they need to control. Right. So besides their habitual need for polarization and conflict, and then you had the Black Leaguers, which were the freedom fighters. And what caused again, just to remind you, what caused the balance in Orion was the Black League mystics and priests, the freedom fighters, got so desperate. And it appears that we have a repetitive pattern that we don't shift until desperation happens.
Oh dear.
Yes. So I want us all to be conscious of this, that we don't always have to wait till that. As I mentioned in the previous part 2, there's a joke about the human race that we're like an action movie where we wait till the absolute last possible minute and then we'll pull it through. Right. So the desperation, we don't need to get to absolute desperation, but in that desperation, the Orion, who never asked anybody for help, right? They're self-sufficient. I don't need anyone. So the Black Leaguer mystics were the ones that asked and prayed and did these rituals, and they were answered by the founders, and which was the original group you can hear about in part 1 or 2. And they were offered the alternative story, which I already explained, of the Orion Christ, which ended up balancing all the polarities on their planet. So they probably took the hardest path. Okay. And they arrived on Earth at their second major visit, separation from Lyra. So we got a lot of them here. Okay. So then we have the Zetas. All right. So the Zetas, they're referred to as Zeta Reticuli. They are not the same as the Greys. And they were extreme polarized to separation. One of their wounds was they had a very limited belief pattern. They were really good geneticists and high technological preferences. They also rejected emotions as unsafe. And they actually had a mental inflexibility and a lack of nurturing capacity for themselves or others. And they were literally in denial of being a dying species until desperation hit them. And in their desperation, they asked the founders, they asked out, and they were given the knowledge that there is a race called the human race that is their exact polar opposite. We are considered the high emotional species. They were considered the high intellectual species. And by them, quote, doing abductions, which has since changed to more contacts because of our consciousness changing and their consciousness changing. They were terrified of us. We were terrified of them because we were looking at the opposite polarized mirror. And the founders said, through that, you will find balance. So that was what that was about. So rejecting emotions is unsafe, all of that. Now, I did mention that they took a portion of the Zetas, which I already explained the story of them being at a point that we are on an Earth where they decimated their apex planet. They had to go underground. They made the decision that emotions was the cause of all their problems. They genetically took emotions out of their body.
Wow.
They gained dying race. They became infertile from the radiation and the poisons. Their heads grew bigger. They got whiter skin because they lived in caves. Their eyes got bigger. And so they basically found that technology, intellectualism, and removing emotions is not a great idea. Because why? Emotions are directly connected to the vitality of our bodies. So they actually, in the abductions, and supposedly we all had soul agreements before coming in to work with them and agree to this, even though it's terrifying to the body and consciousness. They needed neurochemicals and things, and later just used the humans to hold their children because they knew nothing about nurturing.
Oh.
Okay. And so the human children were brought on board. The human were brought on board to hold their own children in some cases or other children. And they had to relearn that over and over and over again. So that's the brief, amazing story of that. And why were they allowed by the founders to come to us? Because this is where we were now. This is where we are now. Decimating, nuclear wars, polluting, whatever. So they, as a dying species, were a probable future reality. Now, we're not taking that. We're on a positive timeline. A section of them became Essassani, which was half, look at these amazing beings, which is half human, half Zeta. They are now in fifth density, which is where we are headed, and a part of us already is. The fourth density, if you can just think of it, is an interim stage because third density rules and fifth density rules are very different. Third density, you've basically got the amnesia veil, you don't remember who you are, the free will, non-interference clause, and polarity options for experience, and whatever goes. Fifth and slow manifestation between what you think and what manifests. Fifth density, what you think manifests. Your abilities become online. You still have duality. You're starting to remember who you are. You're having discussions with others like this, all of those kind of things. So we jump in consciousness from one to the other. That's what we're doing right now. These create symptoms like dizziness, vertigo, all kinds of things that people have been experiencing. And we're practicing holding our center as a species, more of us are, in a fifth density reality rather than third density, which we're moving from. So the Essassani, so there's a successful 5-dimensional hybrid and future option for human incarnations in the future. So what they had was they had a fear of living as their true self, which Bashar, who is an example you can get on YouTube and plug in Bashar, has many teachings, who is channels a Essassani. He calls it a fear of becoming your excitement, following your excitement, giving yourself permission to do that. Okay. They now teach that, but before that was their challenge. They had a resistance to open communication because it required feelings, and the resisting to honoring feelings, remember, coming from the Zetas, but they now balance that out. And when you listen to Bashar online, It might be unusual because you are dealing with a hybrid coming through, but you see the complete balance of high mental intellectualism with open-hearted excitement feeling.
Mm-hmm.
So that was created as a reflection for the humans as a possibility of where we can go. And then humans, I'd like to add them. Their biggest fear is, do you remember from part 1? Abandonment. Okay. Their biggest wound. Why? Because as a growing species, the gods, these Lyrians, would be coming and going and coming and going and coming and going and be angry or happy or this or that. And many people mistook ET overlords for God. So abandonment is the big key human issue and wound to work with. Feelings of less than, or being the opposite, competitive and elitist because of fear, and habitual disempowerment. How many of us tend to over worship others, whether they're rock stars, priests, doctors, or authority figures? Okay, so that needs to be balanced out if we're going to have a mastery of this integration game. So that's
cool.
That's examples of wounds, and you can go to Lisa Royale's site if you want to study many more wounds. Now we're going to get into the techniques.
Okay.
How are we doing on time?
We have 15 minutes, basically.
Okay. So I would like to just, what I will do on my website is I will have all these down. I will have the web addresses and URLs that you can refer to for more data on this. I'm sure many of you that are seekers and teachers and interested in these subjects have heard of these. I have used them. I have very profound stories of healing myself almost instantaneously in many cases, including yesterday when I fell flat on my face and my whole left side of my face was bloody. And as you can see, in 24 hours, it's doing pretty well, which I feel very blessed about. So that would be an example. I am very third density often, but that would be an example of using more fifth dimensional abilities, thinking outside the box and things like that. So one is from the Heart Math Institute. And this is an institute that's been around for a while, at a section down in Stanford, I believe. And they have done massive studies and research on how to integrate the mind with the heart. And this one is called a quick coherent heart technique and takes only 1 minute. I taught it to about 70 nurses once because that's about the only time they have in between clients. I will come back to this. I want to just briefly cover the 7 that I like for those that want to write or go to my website and find it there, so that, because I don't want to just leave you with no tools on how to integrate these emotions. So remember, the first is to bring them up to consciousness. And then the second is by using tools like this. Trust your intuition. You will be naturally guided to whatever's appropriate. You don't have to do a bunch of tools. You don't have to do a bunch. Just do one sincerely, and it doesn't have to be hard. It doesn't have to be hard. Healing can be very simple. It takes focus, but it's basically a simple process. So the Heart Math discovered that the heart is, I believe, 5,000 times stronger magnetically than the brain, and 100 times stronger electrically than the brain. And like the enteric brain cells in our stomach, the heart receives all information, I believe, 1/10 of a second before the brain. So all these societies and genetic propensities, and even what's going on now with the high-tech industry, we don't understand we're our own best technology inside us. Tech is a very useful tool. It's wonderful. It is not to be an excuse to avoid our own ability inside ourselves, okay? Which again will be coming online. Things like moving objects with your mind, telepathy between one another, instantaneous healings are all abilities that will be coming online for people. So you don't always have to look outside yourself. Again, it's a balance. So they've done a lot of research, and there's a technique called the quick coherent technique. And it's really simple. So I'll return to there. I just want to go through this. The other is sensation awareness practice. There are different authors that have this. This is a very, very ancient spiritual practice. And I call it sensation awareness practice. It goes by different names. And it's basically extremely powerful. It does not take that long. And there are several steps. There are 6 steps. I'm just going to go over briefly so you get a sense. You just sit with your eyes closed. You take a deep breath and you drop your energy from your brain into your heart or stomach. That's the first thing to do. And then the rules are no labeling, no diagnosis, no trying to fix or change what you're feeling. All right. This is really important. So all you do is, so you're aware in your body, and then you notice where the feelings are located on your body, what you're feeling. And you will describe that to yourself is without labeling, as a color, a temperature, a location, a tightness, a size, and just allowing those sensations, just noticing those sensations and feeling them without adding any stories about them. Okay. Just open and allow the acceptance of those feelings, just giving it attention, not trying to change it. This actually creates such a neutral now time that these sensations begin to dissipate. You don't have to do it.
Wow.
It is incredibly simple and incredibly powerful for anxiety producing, etc. All right. So there are teachings on that, and I will be putting that on my website too, where you can go to different authors, because I'm a synthesizer, and you can go to different authors and you can look at the different ways they do that. Now, many of you may have heard of Ho'oponopono.
Yay.
I trained with Dr. Len, Hugh Len took one of his classes, and just really, really briefly, are we doing good? Okay with time? We got 10 minutes or so.
We're good.
Okay, you need to know this story.
And then
So,
there's a question. So,
oh yes, okay.
it says, are some of these traits similar or prone to the different nationalities on Earth?
Oh my gosh, what a great question. Oh my gosh, what a great question. Whew. Okay, that could be a whole lecture in itself. Okay, my first take on that is, if you're human, you will carry these traits. Now, depending on the incarnations you have and the free will choices you have, and where you wanted to hang out with more, and what races you wanted to incarnate in with more, you will have certain propensities and lineages. You will have certain propensities of certain traits over other traits. Okay. But all humans originated from Lyrans. So that.
But will the Orions be more in like one country or
it's a great question. Or? I'm really hesitant to talk about this because okay, but I just want to offer this idea that Muhammad is not God. He's an extraterrestrial overlord. The original Yahweh was a good being. The secondary Yahweh talked about was an extraterrestrial overlord. That's why people and religion got confused that, quote, God is angry and vengeful, which makes them neurotic and completely confused about love, which is another key wound. So, yes, the Middle East has some programming towards certain propensities. However, we have to be really careful to stereotype. Africa has propensities, as I don't know if you want to make public what's going on there. No?
Not right now.
Okay.
No.
But
not enough time.
Yeah. So it's a complicated subject, but we are all humans, no matter what skin color, no matter what races, but it really, really depends on our propensities. I've had a lot of Viking lives and things like that. So, there's ones that you have favorite and others, but the point is, generally, if you're an open soul and you acknowledge yourself as a creator being, you want to experience as much diversity as you can, both in sexes and experiences and species and whatever. So I hope that answers a little bit enough of the question.
Okay, thanks.
So Ho'oponopono, Dr. Hugh Lin, he was depressed a lot of his life. When you meet him, he just seems like this normal guy with a baseball cap. He is very diligent and has practiced this for 40 years, and it has helped him immensely and other people. He had quite a reputation. It was a simplified form. Ho'oponopono is a simplified form of family counseling, and it basically refers to that all things are connected, and how can we, and all things are partially our responsibility for creating, because there is no other. They're reflections. So therefore, if I take responsibility, not full responsibility, not like this person's life is my problem, but more like, how are they reflecting me, and what do I need to clear in me to clear the situation? So there are 4 mantras in that, which you can also get online, which is, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you, and thank you, thank you, thank you. And he has an amazing story where he was asked for the 3rd time to be the head of a Hawaii State Hospital in the special ward with the mentally ill. And he finally accepted. And he was taken to his office, and I think the 30 files of the people were thrown down, and they were completely violent, in chains. They couldn't keep employees,
Right.
all of that stuff. I mean, people were terrified. And he says, I don't plan on seeing any of them. And the guy goes, what? And he didn't. He basically looked at the picture. Some part of him, he didn't know consciously what it was. You don't have to know consciously to clear, but subconsciously, just basically said, I'm sorry, please forgive me, I love you. And within, I think, 3 months, all of them were out of chains. Within 6 months, he did not talk to them. This is how powerful energy is and how interconnected we are. 6 months, I think all were off meds except for 1 or 2. And then eventually everyone was free.
Wow.
So it's an incredibly powerful story. So that's great. And how much time? We've got a couple of, and believe me, the first time you do it, I reversed skin cancer on one of my cheeks in 20 hours by doing it. And I've used it a lot for other things, but I wasn't really great when I started. I basically kind of went, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry, but it is her fault. Or, okay, let me start over. I'm sorry. God, can't believe I'm doing this. Okay, I'm sorry. But I was right. So in other words, it might take a little practice to get to that deep, sincere place. And you'll know, because almost tears will come up and you will feel that communion and that connection. Also, there's Dolores Cannon, who recently crossed over. I trained with her. You can find it on my website, Quantum Healing Hypnosis Therapy. And it is very useful for phobias and to access higher self abilities, as well as bringing in consciousness around agreements, contracts, past parallel lives, and lifetimes that triggered recurring traumas that you may not figure out or be able to heal. So I took her training. I have found it useful in many cases. And like I said, especially phobias that you can't track in this life are often how you, quote, died in a previous life. Wow. This is another way to do healings. And then Anelia Benz is an ET, a human, and she has ascension101.com. And she has 2 great exercises, one called fear processing and firewall processing exercises. And we don't have time to get into that, but those are excellent. She has them printed out free on her website for you. And one of the most powerful, my favorite, simple, I've seen it in action, is Byron Katie's work. It's called The Work, or For Inquiries. It's thework.com. And her basic story, really quick, was, if I have this right, is alcoholic, every possible thing, anger, addiction, everything. Her family finally put her in a rehab center. She, I believe, was under the bed. She noticed a spider, and kind of like the Eckhart Tolle story, she went into God consciousness. And she came out with these 4 inquiries, and they reverse everything. They're so powerful, and they're briefly, it won't mean a lot to you until you go through it, but is it true Can I really know that it's true? What do I get when I hold that belief? Who or what would I be without that belief? And I watched a whole audience, and this person volunteered and came up, and she said, no, you don't get it. I really want to kill my husband. This is what he's done. This is what he's done. And if you're listening to that, even though you're shocked, you're going, yeah, I'd kill him too. You know, I mean, she was, quote, totally justified in some bizarre way. In 40 minutes, by Byron taking her through that process with no judgment, where her own awareness arises, she was healed.
Wow.
It is very profound. And you can go on thework.com, and she has a sheet called the, that you can do yourself, called Instructions for Doing the Work. It's very simple. And these are called turnarounds, and it completely turns around. You take responsibility, it completely turns around the whole thing. So these are my favorite tools.
Great.
And I think we only have a couple minutes. So I won't be taking you through the quick coherent heart technique, but just go to heartmath.com. And if you need any information, again, I'm happy to give that to you. So.
And did you want to show those last couple slides for your conclusion? Because they're
sure,
really cute.
Sure.
All right.
Brian, can you put those up? So, we're at the beginning of 2016, and during these past 50 years, we are moving very, very, very rapidly. And okay, so I found this and I loved it. As an alien, this is how I see your solar system. So the first planet's a spa, the second's a resort, and Earth is a zoo. And they actually refer to us as a zoo planet originally. We are the highest diversity with the more combination of species and plant life and everything. And then tennis court.
Great.
That's right. Parking garage, amusement park.
Is that Jupiter?
Yeah.
Okay.
Amusement park Saturn, because people don't know this, but the rings are being mined all the time.
Right.
And the gym and the fridge and the freezer, Pluto. So I thought that was just really cute. Okay, next one. All right. And this was another one, which I thought was very interesting, because we've talked about Nordics are sometimes a Palladian group and sometimes another group. And we have the Zetas locations here, and the Syrians and the reptilians, which we haven't gotten into, and the Andromedans. So that's kind of a fun little quick blurb. And then the next one, Brian. So this is how I'd like to end. It's time to make a choice to integrate polarities and ancestral wounds. You choose fear or love. Next. What does integration and love look like? And this is a NASA picture. Is that like
lovely.
Beautiful? It's all love, and so are we. And I don't know if you can see these pictures. These are people being approached by armed guards, and they're kissing them and hugging them and putting flowers down them. And the guards are just like hugging them back.
Oh, wow.
Okay. It's all love, and so are we. Next. Little time delay. This is another NASA picture. Flowering into a mature species as this new era is birthed into being. And Rumi wrote a poem, Earth is not a final place of rest for a bird born from the sea. No, we are pearls of that ocean. This is the time of union, the time of eternal beauty. The morning of happiness has dawned.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you.
Happy voyaging.
Thank you. There's a final question, and I'm not going to have you answer it tonight, because I'll send it to you so you can send me the thing. It says, what makes you believe that this is a higher frequency age for ascension than previous generations? So we will have Merrily maybe send me a quick answer during the week.
Absolutely.
And I'll have that for you next week.
Absolutely.
And just as a reminder, on Merrily's website, supersoulsolutions.com, she will be posting the contact information for all the originators of the simple yet profound healing modalities that she mentioned tonight. Solutions to help you integrate faster and move into the future with confidence. She'll also be adding weekly the most current information that is relevant to know, because now is the time and these next 2 years are pivotal. So thank you, Merrily, for all
Oh,
3
thank
parts of
you.
the Earth Game Mastery.
And thank you, audience. And I hope to hear from you and help in any way I can.
And
thank you for being here.
Yes, indeed. Thanks for everybody being here, and we'll see you next week. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.